So this week I am excited to welcome to the Mainly Moonology podcast one of the world's foremost astrologers. Lynn Bell. Lynn Bell has been an astrologer for actually over 4 decades, even though she looks so young. She was a long-time tutor at the celebrated Centre for Psychological Astrology, and she now teaches for Astrology University and MISPA online. Lynn has taught and travelled over much of the world to speak about our relationship with the stars. And just a little personal note, Lynn and I met when I was living in Paris back in the day, in the early 2000s. And every man and his dog said to me, "Have you met Lynn Bell yet? Have you met Lynn Bell yet?" And so eventually I rang her up or texted her or whatever we did back in 2004 or whatever it was, and said, "Hi, Lynn, I'm Yasmin. I'm an astrologer. Shall we have a cup of coffee?" And so here we are. Only 20 years later. It actually feels like longer in a way, doesn't it?
Oh, is it only 20 years, Yasmin?
I know, it feels like longer, but it is. It's been 20 years, yeah. So if you follow astrology, then you will know that this week there is a very, very, very important big change taking place in the skies. And, I call this the Mainly Moonology podcast because we mainly talk about moonology, except when there's something that's so important astrologically that we actually need to address it. And that is the move this week of the planet Saturn moving into the first sign of the zodiac, Aries. So it's kind of what you'd call a red letter week. What I thought I would do, Lynn, is because some of our readers are kind of astrology newbies, some of our readers are, veteran astrologers who've probably seen you talking at conferences and so on. But let's just start off very softly. And let's say, because I've actually had this question, and I'd love to hear your take on it. A very new to astrology person said to me, "What does it mean Saturn's moving into Aries?" So because it's a good question, isn't it? We don't even think of that anymore. Let's address that.
Well, with Western astrology, first of all, bases the zodiac, the moments of the spring, summer, winter, and fall, rather than the constellations in the sky that give their names to the signs. And so Aries is that moment of spring in the northern hemisphere, autumn in the southern hemisphere, but it's considered the beginning, the spring, that point. So when a planet moves to that point where the turn of the year comes, either to longer days or longer nights, you suddenly have this new energy come in. So a planet changing sign is hitting a point, one of these 30-degree points of the zodiac. But Aries very specifically is that one.
Right. And so Saturn takes about 29, 30 years to go around the chart, depending on the year and the cycle. So we haven't had this for some time. I haven't looked up the actual date.
April 9th, 1996 was the last time Saturn was entered Aries.
96. Okay. So for everybody, it's a big deal because we all have a chart and it means it's going into a different part of our chart. So it might be going into your money zone or your love zone. And in fact, Lynn, I believe, is holding a workshop where she may reveal all this to people.
Yes, I'm really interested. I think Saturn gives us a guideline when it changes signs. Saturn very often holds the structure or the rules during a certain period in time. And since Saturn's been in Pisces, where everything falls apart and falls to pieces and nothing makes sense anymore, Saturn goes into Aries as everyone is just fed up with not knowing and ready to get on with it. But it means they have no past, no grid, no rules for how to do that. So it's just try it, see if it works. And there's a very strong, there have been a lot of planets in Aries in the past month or so that I'm sure you've been talking about, Yasmin, but Saturn going in changes He has a very different quality because it will be there for 2.5 years. And it's almost like, okay, here comes the boss. Everybody else has been rushing forward, trying, and now the big guy's in town, ready to hold things to a certain direction.
Yeah, yeah. Now, what is the name of the workshop you're giving? Let me just find it because it stopped me in my tracks.
It's Only the Brave.
Only the Brave. That's right. Thank you. Sorry about that. Saturn in Aries, Only the Brave. Now, why did you choose that title? Because, Aries we know is the brave sign ruled by Mars. Tell us more about that title.
Well, because I think that's, as I said, Saturn says, all right, you need to do this. And not doing this, there could be consequences. And since Aries' main quality is courage, no matter what is going on, no matter what happens, there's this notion of we can't let anything stop us. And so that's where the title Only the Brave came from.
Yeah. And, when we look at what's going on in the world, which is, like every generation says, it's all going to hell in a handbasket.
Every generation, yeah.
But I do feel like, the rules kind of no longer apply. I mean, we've had things, I don't want to get too political because people hate it when I do that, but I can say very factually, this is not pro or anti either American party. We've had, issues with the Supreme Court feeling that their rules are not being abided by some of the things that have been going on in the Trump administration. For example, there were the flights that were called back, which didn't get called back. There's been someone sent, blah. I don't want to get into it. But I feel like Saturn in Aries, and we will already be feeling it because we're only very close to it as we're recording this. I feel like it is a bit of a rule-breaking thing. Do you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. And in both an exciting way and a difficult way, right? Because who breaks the rules? Innovators break the rules. Innovators break out into new areas, and bad boys and bad girls break the rules, all the time. In fact, we all break rules, but we may not necessarily. But what it seems is that ignoring the rules or defying the rules with Saturn and Aries is more like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
At other times, it's kind of like, try and stop me. So try and stop me. So a challenge is laid down. So what it is in you, I think one of the things that's very interesting going forward with Saturn and Aries is to ask the question, what it is in you that has stopped you in the past? And what are you saying no to now?
I love that. And I don't want to get too much into the whole Neptune in Aries thing because that just complicates matters. But Neptune's also moving into Aries, and at around the same time, in fact, the two planets are going to meet. And I was talking to someone the other day, I can't remember who it was, I wish I could. It was such a great point they made about it's the end of victim mentality, which, as Neptune moves out of Pisces into Aries, we've got Saturn in Aries. I feel like there's a bit more like what has been stopping you, and stop being a victim, stop being a martyr, stop all that stuff.
We have had a moment in this last while where those who have been overlooked, mistreated, ill-considered, had to be put first at every moment, let's say. And that was a fantastic corrective for so many things. But at the same time, it doesn't exactly lead you to the new in a way. And it began to be more, there can be things in that period of Neptune. What you're just saying is Neptune idealizes the sign it's in. So idealizing the poor, the suffering, those who have been overlooked or actively misused, right?
Yeah.
And in a way, lifting that up so everybody could see it and acknowledge it to some degree. But what that also did is bring up this thing like, oh, what about me? What about me? Why should I care? Why should I hold back? Because something terrible happened to you. And I think this is human nature. We can't, the planets and the change of planets in the signs, the archetypal changes, are really about our own nature, different parts of it coming to the fore and being called up to engage in the world. So there is a thing, which is Saturn in Aries says, okay, so what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I should give credit where credit's due. It was actually Stephanie Galing who was talking about how we're moving from the sort of the suffering and the martyrdom and the victim, mentality into the really like do it now, Aries energy. And also I feel like as well the rules are changing. And do you think it's too much of a stretch to sort of go, well, Saturn rules, Aries new? Like we're getting a new set of rules.
Look, having the Saturn Neptune conjunction, which is a whole other story. I did a whole workshop on this with Carolyn.
It's a whole conference.
Well, I did a series of classes earlier this year for Carolyn Mace's CMed program, and one of them is on Neptune and Aries, and one of them is on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is also happening. That's, as you said, it's quite complex. It's so powerful this year. There's so many changes and so many things going on. But yes, the old rules are done, right?
Yeah.
And even the head of the Catholic churches, the Pope Francis, who died the day after Easter Sunday, I mean, that's another, it's another sign of the end of a whole system of belief, you could say, and the beginning of a new one, among so many.
Yeah. Actually, on that point, talking about faith and so on, let's segue to the soul. You have said the soul is called differently each time Saturn changes signs. The soul is called in differently. How would you describe the soul's call during Saturn in Aries? What's the invitation for us spiritually, do you think, or energetically?
Well, it's just that. It's called to find I believe that Saturn in Aries calls us to not give up, to have something inside that is incredibly firm, directed, and strong, even if it doesn't happen immediately, which is what Aries wants. But there is an impulse to the new. And Saturn, I think, calls the soul to a kind of perseverance in its intention to act and to move forward.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I know you've done deep work on family patterns. So how do you think, say, Saturn in Aries can stir up, I don't know, ancestral themes around courage, timing, independence?
Oh, yeah, that's very interesting. I had dinner with friends in the country not long ago, and at another family's who's I've known for a long time, and one of the children's has Saturn. One has Saturn in Pisces and is drifting on generous French unemployment. And the other is Saturn in Aries, who started a career in fashion, just thought, not sure I like this, and went back and started a completely different self-starting profession, which is woodworking, which happened to be what her father did. And so Saturn in Aries is actually taking your cue from the courageous act of maybe an ancestor, like calling in that spirit of someone who's courageous, and had to basically find their own way forward.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you've spoken as well, Lynn, about the importance of connecting our personal lives to the great shifts in the world cycles. So how do we recognize, especially if we're not an astrologer, we're not well-versed, we're just finding our feet, how do we recognize when these bigger cosmic transitions like Saturn changing signs are actually echoing in our own lives? What should people be looking for this week?
This week, right? Well, this week, it may be that you're going to start seeing people, um, because it's quite complex. Saturn is not just going into Aries, but about to interact with quite a few other things in the sky. And what you'll find is that if the rules that are coming down, because a planet can always be experienced from outside, like Saturn and Aries could be, the bullies are everywhere. There's no negotiation. I said it's this way, therefore it's that way. I'm not interested in your opinion, that kind of thing. So how do the Saturn and Aries is really attention on, is that happening outside? Are you afraid of other people's authority or aggression? And are you being called to stand up for yourself in some way? Because we never know. So that's one way the collective can work. Are we being collectively bullied? Are we being collectively told that our liberties are taken away from us on some level? And what do we do about that? Okay. So I think there's something being called up. That's again the whole idea of the spiritual.
Yeah.
What is being called up in each of us in response to events that might seem unjust? So one of the ways to look at the larger world is to look at injustice and imbalance, because these are the opposite of Aries. Remember, they're linked to the sign of Libra. Which is justice and balance. And Saturn in Aries is like reacting very powerfully in an extreme way to the opposite of what it needs.
Yeah. 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 And also another thing, like we're talking about, do you need to stand up for yourself? But let's also talk about if you are a leader, because Saturn in Aries can be the selfish leader, which we don't want to see on the world stage. But if somebody's a leader in their own life, even if they're a boss, they run a company, what is it for them? Is it, stand up and be reasonable?
One of the things I've noticed is that people really feel a very strong calling to what's unique in themselves. They're not looking for an outer model. So what you're noticing is the old models, what we've been talking about, the collective energy is telling us the old models, they just feel like they're emptying out, breaking apart, not working. And even there are people who are actively smashing them. It's also time. Configurations we're seeing, the fact that Saturn is basically dancing with Neptune the whole time, which dissolves things, means that the old structures just aren't going to be here anymore.
Yeah.
And so what happens when the boundaries of the world change? What happens when the rules that we've all been used to following collectively don't work? When that happens, then you have to find a new resource. And there's something incredibly exciting about that.
Yeah. So, Lynn, as a very experienced, seasoned astrologer, I'm just wondering for people who are at home going, oh, okay, I wonder where Saturn's going in for me. And the way to find that out is to look at where in your chart you have Aries. But for you, will you be having a look and seeing where Saturn's going to be in your chart? And, what will you do with that on a really simple, basic level for people to understand? How do you work on this on a really personal level? I mean, it's lessons for one thing, isn't it?
Well, my colleague Darby Costello has been saying, as you have to really know your own Mars as all these planets go into Aries, because our personal Mars is the planet that's most responding to the change both of Neptune and of Saturn.
Oh, yes, I love that.
Right. And so if you look at the state of Mars in your chart as well as where Aries is in your chart, the two go together for astrologers. When you're doing personal astrology, that really is not separate.
Yeah. No, very, very interesting. Very interesting. Okay. All right. So another thing I wanted to mention, because I know people will wonder about this, is for those people who have Saturn in Aries, they're going to have their Saturn return in Aries. Is there anything in particular to say about that? It's like just get ready? Or, I mean, obviously it happens at about 29, 30, then it happens at sort of 58, 59.
Sure. Well, I was thinking of someone I know who is having the second Saturn return and who, had a kind of a series of jobs she wasn't particularly excited about. And then at age 50, retrained in a trade, a manual trade, and now takes on 9 month contracts, travels to different cities because manual trades are highly in demand.
Yeah.
And earns much more money than ever. So the Saturn return test, again, for anybody born with Saturn in Aries, have you taken the direction of your life into your own hands at a certain point? And for those who are having the first Saturn return, and for anyone having their first Saturn return, the balance between outer authority and the inner voice and attention is always the key. Like, which have you listened till up till now? And whether your Saturn return brings tough love or wonderful opportunities may have something to do with the way you've been listening in the first 29 years to how Saturn acts in your chart.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. So, Lynn, just tell us a little bit about what is going to be in your workshop, Only the Brave. What if people are listening, they're going, this is amazing, this is resonating, I want to know more. What are they going to find?
I mean, I'm going to talk into more detail about the kinds of challenges and difficulties and gifts that come with this placement and how they will be interacting with other things. I'll talk about it in a slightly more complex way, but I'm sure that doing the workshop will give very powerful cues. Listening to this workshop will give very powerful cues to how to deal with Saturn in Aries. I mean, I think there are many different perspectives on it and different things in our toolkit we're going to need.
Yeah.
So I'm very interested in talking about that.
And of course, if people, by the time this podcast airs, actually, you'll have recorded it. So people will be watching the replay. There's no worries about missing the live. It'll be the replay.
That's right.
Right. And another question I know that will come up for people is something that we said at the very start of this, which is that the last time Saturn was in Aries was in 1996. And everyone's going to go, oh, that was the year that whatever, how do we play with that?
Well, we can go to so there's 1996, there's 1968. 68 was like kind of a political explosion of people saying no all over the world. 67, 68.
And Saturn says no.
And, in France changed totally, swept Saturn. But there were many other cycles involved. It wasn't just Saturn and Aries. As you know, you've lived here and I lived in France, but everybody talked about 1968 all the time as the key year, the year where nothing would ever be the same again. So, and you can go back further to a year like 1939, for example, which was maybe not the manifestation of Saturn and Aries that we would like to see now because it's the beginning of World War II. Yeah. But 1996 is really, we all got on the internet. We all had a new way, a new pathway, I got email probably the preceding year, but essentially what was happening was the new world that we live in now was coming into being. And because the last transit of Saturn in Aries came with a new technology that had never existed before, a lot of the energy of the new went into technological change. And that could be the same now because of AI and a million other things basically that are happening.
Yeah. And one thing I always say to people as well, if they're thinking about their own personal life, is, well, the thing is, all the other planets are in different places than they were in 96. So if you had a disastrous year, it doesn't mean you're going to have another disastrous year.
Oh, that's right. And it's kind of And I don't think of that as a disastrous. I mean, if you were born that year and it was a difficult birth, that could be a disastrous year. But there are stories of. I think there are stories of overcoming that belong to Saturn and Aries, and it's part of the gift of the placement. So I'll be talking about that more in the workshop, and people can get the recording and listen to that. So.
And so people should go to astrologyuniversity.com and just put your name in there.
Lynn Bell, astrologyuniversity.com. And actually, I think there's a link that maybe you can put up for listeners of the podcast.
I will definitely put the link up as well. But if they're listening to this as they walk the dog, just go Lynn Bell, Astrology University, and you'll get the talk. And I can tell you, Lynn is one of the most respected astrologers in the world, and so you're learning from the best if you listen to the workshop, to be honest. So give it a go.
That's very kind.
Well, it's just true, isn't it? So, Lynn, where can people find you? Do you still do readings? Are you booked up for the next 6 months?
You have to. It takes a while, but yes, people can write me, and sometimes I'm slow with email when I'm traveling or overwhelmed. But just nudge me again, and I will eventually respond. But yes, I'm thinking about putting a planner on my website, so that might make life easier.
What a revolutionary idea that would be for Saturn in Aries and a new technological breakthrough. Lynn Bell puts a planner on her website. Well, talk to me. I can tell you the really good one to use. I've got a good one.
Yeah, you have Planety, right?
Mm. No, I have Calendly.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So it syncs with your Google Calendar, and then it knows when you're busy and when you're not, and it just offers up spots when you're free for whatever.
Yeah,
for things like this.
So that's great. Yes, that's the way to do it.
And your website, lynnbell.com?
Yeah, lynnbellastrology.com.
lynnbellastrology.com. Okay. So I do have just a couple more quick questions to finish. I hope that's okay. But again, I know people are going to be asking themselves this stuff, so I think it's good if we just address it. If you're an Aries and you're listening to this, is it something to look forward to, or is it something to be worried about?
Well, if you're an Aries, it's calling you, there may be a moment. Okay, so first of all, Saturn is going to only enter the first couple of degrees of the sign this year. It doesn't go very far. So its transit only concerns you if you're born in March. But next year, you'll get a longer visit from Saturn beginning from March of 2026 onwards. But Saturn always calls you up to something that has the quality of fate. It has the quality of this is the moment. This is the moment. Don't miss it. Be prepared. Have everything in order. And sometimes it calls you through a passage that might not be the most comfortable for you, because Saturn, of course, has constraint. And Mars doesn't want any constraint for its immediate desire. So there is a period during this transit where it's not really Aries' favorite. But if it's well handled, well responded to, well earned, it can be one of the best periods ever.
Wow. And so the cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, does that all apply for them as well?
It all applies for them.
And I think overall we can say if you're an air sign or a fire sign, Saturn's kind of on your side in this cycle. It's going to at least harmonize with your sun, if nothing else.
That's right. Yes. If you're air or fire, there's so much action going on, especially for the people born in the beginning of the signs, or anybody who has planets in these signs. Or if you're using whole sign houses, immediately those houses are all lit up. The houses that contain Aries and Gemini and Aquarius.
Yeah. And we haven't mentioned the earth signs, so let's give them a little hello. I mean, for them, it's a little bit different because it's the inconjuncts and the semi-sextile.
Well, yes, and Earth likes time, but the Earth signs have been having a lot of support for quite a few years from the outer planets, and it's time for them to be slightly taken out of their comfort zone.
Stand on their own 2 feet while somebody else gets a bit of support.
Yes, but remember, this year it's the beginning of this process. We're getting the first signs of it.
Yeah.
And it's going to be going on for 2.5 years. So we're going to be learning a lot about Saturn and Aries. And, I would practice your draw, practice work on your instincts, your reflexes, your ability to go fast.
Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
Lynn Bell, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Yasmin. It's a pleasure to exchange with you again.
And I hope that I'll see you in Paris or London soon.
That would be delightful.